In this video, I'm going to show you how to paint the Blood Ravens chapter from Warhammer 40,000 Dawn of War, and so you can follow along. This is going to be an easy to follow step-by-step guide, giving you the knowledge and confidence to get your own Blood Ravens ready for the tabletop. From their iconic crimson armour, unique colours and details, to a much simpler way to paint them for your army, by the end of this tutorial, you'll have no problem getting your Blood Ravens fully painted. My name's Michael and welcome to TableTopReady, and in this tutorial I'm going to be showing you how to paint the legendary Blood Ravens from Dawn of War, so you can use them in your own games of Warhammer 40,000. All of the paints and brushes I use will be shown on the screen as I use them, and they'll also be listed in the description along with links to my favourite hobby tools and equipment you see me using. And before we get started, we'll first have to get our miniatures ready for painting, which involves building them using sub-assemblies and getting them undercoated with some Mephiston red spray. And if you want to learn more about getting your miniatures ready for painting, I have a dedicated video on the channel that covers sub-assemblies and undercoating your miniatures in depth. So when you're ready, we can get started and learn how mastering the basics is really what makes a difference. For me, the best place to start is to get all of our base colours painted first, because this lets us spend time choosing what colours we want, and painting becomes less overwhelming as we've created a great starting point to work from. Let's start with the iconic crimson red armour, and for this we're going to mix an equal amount of corn red and Mephiston red, and for best results we want to thin our paint, and I find an equal amount of water does the trick. We also want to remove excess paint from our brush on some paper towel first to give us more control when painting. Then when you're ready, keep your brush moving and try not to go over any areas you've already painted to prevent creating any unwanted texture whilst the paint is still drying. And because we thinned our paint, it won't have covered so well, so let's repeat the process and apply another layer. This lets us build up to a solid colour without losing any detail. Just make sure to let each layer fully dry first before doing another one. If you're interested in learning why and how we thin our paints, go check out my video going into more depth. It's really easy to overlook the basics, like how we apply paint to our miniatures and even just keeping things neat and tidy. And for me, even now after all these years, it's practicing those basics that really makes a difference. After the armour is done, we can use a bad and black for weapon casings, the ribbon between the armour and the shoulder pad trims as well. And although we want to be as neat as possible whilst painting, if you're like me, you're going to be messy and make mistakes. That's okay though, we can always go back and tidy things up as we go, or wait until all the base colours are done before fixing them. Something else we might want to do is to have something that we can hold on to whilst painting. Here I'm using some plastic shot glasses. This is because having a painting handle or attaching the miniature to something to hold on to makes painting more comfortable and prevents us from touching our miniatures too much. Now we have the black details painted, we can paint any chest decorations with Eshin Grey. And for shoulder pads, let's use some Wraith Bone. For this, it's important to use multiple thin layers to build up to a solid colour. Let's get any belts and pouches painted next using an equal amount of Rhinox Hide and Mournfang Brown. Finally, let's get any silver details painted with Ironhand Steel and gold details with Retributor Armour. We've now gotten all of our base colours painted, making sure we've also tidied up any messy areas and mistakes along the way, which means we have a great foundation to start learning and using other techniques. Even though we have all of our base colours painted, our Blood Raven is looking pretty flat, so let's see how we can create definition helping to bring out all of those details. I first want to show you how we can make our armour more interesting to look at and break up those flatter areas using a glaze. We're using Galvorback Red, and to make this a glaze we want to thin this down with twice the amount of water. This is going to make it more transparent, allowing any colours underneath to show through. We want to apply this in thin layers around the lower legs, feet and anywhere else we think would look interesting. And so we achieve a really nice smooth gradient, we can use a glaze of the colour we're working from. Here I'm using a corn red glaze and working it in the opposite direction. Glazing is a really fun technique to use that lets us achieve smoother blends, add different tones and create interest across our miniatures. And with some time and practice, anyone can do it, no matter your skill level. Now let's bring out the details with a recessed shade using our Galvorback Red helping to bring out details, making them easier to see. Recess shade involves painting directly into recesses and areas to create our definition, rather than using an overall wash, which can be messy and darken the colours we apply them over. If you're a bit messy, we can neaten things back up with our base colour. Another way to create definition is with shades, so let's use some Norn oil next and apply this over our chest decorations and any silver details. For any gold details, let's use Reikland Flesh shade. Now with our definition created and things looking more interesting, let's move on to learning how to highlight. The area behind highlighting is to bring out areas, raise details and all those edges to draw our attention to them and to make these features stand out. The most prominent way of highlighting, and the one we most associate with it, is the line highlight, and it's this highlight that we're going to be focusing on. The first highlight we're going to do is called a chunky highlight, and for this we use a Mephiston red. Again, we want to thin our paint and remove any excess on some paper towel first, which is going to prevent thick blobby lines. This highlight wants to be quite a thick line so we can still see it once we've painted our finer highlights after this. So our next highlight is called an edge highlight. I'm using Troll Slayer Orange, and this is used on any edges and to continue bringing out any details. To make this easier, we can angle our brush against an edge and run it along the edge to create the highlight. For the areas we can't do this, then we just need to take our time painting thin lines where we want our highlights to be. Now I know highlighting can be tricky and not everyone likes doing them, but it does get easier with practice, and you'll even notice that your hand-eye coordination and brush control will get better as a result, making us better painters overall. Let's continue highlighting with a finer highlight, mixing an equal amount Troll Slayer Orange and Ungor Flesh together. This highlight is used to emphasise any edges and areas we want to be more prominent and eye-catching. Then the last highlight we can do is called a spot highlight, using Ungor Flesh to paint little dots on all the corners of the armour where light would be more focused. And once you've done painting all your highlights, you'll be able to see what a difference it's made to our miniature. If you want to know more about highlighting, then I've got a dedicated video on the channel which goes into more detail about what I find helps me and what I did to improve. Now that we've learnt how to create definition and learnt about the different highlights we can do, let's work on getting everything else painted. Let's begin by getting any trims and weapons finished, as well as the ribbing between the armour, and for these let's start with Eshin Grey for our chunky highlight. Now we can use Dawnstone for our edge highlight, and for the ribbed areas this means painting a line more towards the centre of the raised ridge to emphasise that curve. We can then finish these details with a spot highlight using Administratum Grey. For any chest decorations, we just need to do an edge highlight using Dawnstone to finish them. When it comes to finishing the shoulder pads, we can use a Ushabti bone glaze starting from the middle and building this up towards the bottom edge to make them look more interesting. Remember, we can smooth things out with a glaze from the colour underneath. We can also use our Ushabti bone to darken the rim of the pad. Then highlight around the edge of the pad with white scar. The next details to finish are any belts and pouches, first doing a recessed shade using Rhinox hide, and this can also be used as a glaze for some of the shallower areas. Now do a chunky highlight with Doomball Brown, and for our edge highlights let's use Carrick Stone to finish these details. Then all the last areas to get highlighted are all the gold and silver details, and for this we can use Stormhost Silver. We have to remember that we may not be very good at something when we're first starting out, and it takes time and practice before we can get good at something. We just have to remember to take our time and enjoy the process. Before we move on to the last section where I'll be showing how to add interest and talk about how we can create the chapter symbol, I want to show you that we can also paint our marines in a much simpler way. So what I've been showing you can be a lot, especially if you want to paint an army, but we can keep things simple by cutting out some of the steps. I just wanted to show you what's possible so you can choose the approach that works best for you. So for a simple marine, I suggest doing your base colours and creating definition the same way as we did before, but leaving out the glazing if you're not ready for that. For the highlights we can just stick to the edge highlights, which I've also shown you how to do, and this will still give you great results, but will be much quicker to replicate across an army. I want to start by adding some interest to our armour and making it look more weathered and worn, painting scuffs and scratches using Troll Slayer Orange. If you want to make the armour look more weathered, we can use Rhinox hide and paint chips along edges using the side of our brush. And remember to paint any rivets as well with Stormhouse Silver. It's a small thing, but it really does make a difference. Let's talk about the chapter symbol, which isn't readily available as a transfer at the time of making this tutorial. So what I decided to do was to find some transfers I could use. Here I'm using a Raven Guard transfer and a Blood Drop. We can paint over these as well, but if that's all too much, I'm sure you can find some on the internet somewhere. I know this isn't canon, but I actually think this looks just as good. The last thing to do on our marines is to paint those lenses, which I always like to leave until last. A fancy way to do them is to start with Warpstone Glow, then paint a thin line along the bottom edge with Moot Green. Then finish any lens with a dot of white scar in the top rear corner. If you want to do the lens in a much simpler way, first paint some white scar into the centre of each lens. We can then apply some Striking Scorpion contrast to give us a nice glow effect. I've been a fan of the Dawn of War games since they first released, and I really wanted to show you guys how to paint the legendary Blood Ravens chapter, so you can use them in your own games of Warhammer 40,000. So let's see how they turned out. The last thing I want to do is to say a massive thank you to all the amazing people who've made this tutorial possible with their continued support. It really means a lot. Your generosity allows me to get all the paints, brushes and miniatures I need to make these tutorials, so I can continue to help you get better at painting. And I especially want to thank Roberto Marco Martinez, Yukaz and Yang, who have recently become supporters or have donated to the channel. Thank you so much. If you enjoy the content here on TableTopReady and feel you get value from it, you can also support the channel by becoming a channel member or joining my Patreon. You'll get access to our Discord, regular updates and early access to videos and tutorials. We've now finished painting our Blood Raven, and I hope I've been able to give you the confidence and knowledge to paint your own. I've got plenty of other tutorials on the channel showing how to improve your painting and how you can paint some of the legendary chapters of Space Marines, so make sure to go and check those out as well. I really do enjoy making these tutorials and I hope you find them useful. If you do, then please leave a like and let me know in the comments below. I always love hearing your thoughts. As well, make sure to subscribe if you don't want to miss out on future content, and I'll see you in the next video.